Hey, it's Pat Gillis here, and I got a couple of horses in my barn that will, at feeding time, they get really impatient and they will kick the wall so hard that they've actually managed to break through some really thick wood in the past. And when you think about the power of a horse's kick, it becomes kind of remarkable that they've managed to survive for millions of years and form sort of social cohesive groups or herds and not kill one another. And I think an important reason for that survival has been the horse's ability to kind of go through the motions rather than actually really trying to hurt one another. Now, obviously, I'm just to be clear, I'm not talking about stallions who really will try to kill each other. I'm talking about just your basic horses in a herd working out their relationships. Then these horses, they've honed the skill over millions of years, and in the process, they became masters at reading body language, like absolute masters at it. And when you first start working with horses, it's kind of like learning a foreign language, to be honest. But the more you study it, the more fluent you'll get. And I think it's an essential skill for anyone who considers himself a serious horseman. It's an essential skill to acquire. So I put together this little video just to give you some examples of some really obvious signals that horses send. Because sometimes once you've looked for or you've seen the obvious stuff, it gets easier to see the subtle stuff. And I gotta be honest, it was also an excuse for me to show you some footage of my recently departed dear grandpa. It's footage from when we first got him, and he really was magnificent. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so here's Grandpa. He has to meet Cash first. So Cash is the little guy, and obviously Cash doesn't think too much of Grandpa. In fact, he's pretty angry that Grandpa's in this field at all, and Grandpa clearly doesn't know quite what to make of this little guy. Cash decides he's going to check him out, but I don't think for very long. Nope. My experience has been usually the guys that do most of the squealing and the biggest sort of reactions end up kind of at the bottom of the relationship if there's going to be a pecking order between the two of them. Here comes Cash again. Now he's not quite done with Grandpa. He's going to check him out again. These two ended up actually being really good friends. It just took them a while to kind of get used to them, or get used to each other, I guess. You'll notice that they sniff in this area a lot. If a horse is going to be anxious or nervous about something, the anxious sort of sweat originates right where that hind leg joins the belly of the horse. That's the first place that the horse starts to sweat, and researchers think that that's probably why horses sniff there first. They want to check out if the other guy's nervous. This is Grandpa now meeting Buttercup. Buttercup, you'll notice, kicks out quite violently a number of times when he's first meeting Grandpa. But as time goes on, he gets a little less violent about it. Grandpa keeps sniffing in that area, and Buttercup's not too big on it. But you'll notice the kick's getting a little less violent. And there you go. No kick at all that time. But Cash isn't done with Grandpa yet. He's decided now he doesn't want Buttercup to get anywhere near Grandpa, so he's going to try to keep Buttercup away from him. Buttercup isn't as eager about this as Cash is. I think Buttercup at this point kind of wants to get to know Grandpa a little bit, but Cash will have none of it. And so he keeps trying to keep himself between Buttercup and Grandpa. He eventually gets a little bit cross with Buttercup because Buttercup keeps trying to get back to Grandpa. And after he gets cross with Buttercup, he gives up. And there you go. He kicks out at at Buttercup, and he leaves. Now we have Eddie. That's the last horse that Grandpa had to meet that day. There's Buttercup and Cash coming over to tell Eddie all about the new guy in the field. But it's pretty clear that Eddie already knew because he goes immediately to see Grandpa. And there's Cash, of course. He just runs around like this all the time. That's Cash. He's so funny. When everybody else is in a meet and greet, Cash is usually just running around like a lunatic. He's one of the funniest horses I've ever had. He really is. So they're all in pretty close quarters here, and there's a lot of squealing and kicking, and yet no one gets hurt. And this is, in my experience, how it almost always works out. They seem to realize how close they can get, how much they can push. And even though it looks sort of violent and loud and crazy sometimes, almost always everybody ends up okay and unscathed at the end. Researchers believe that man domesticated the horse around 6000 BC. So that means that horses have had quite a bit of time to practice reading our body language. And it's why learning how to interact with them before we even ride them can be a complete game changer. And honestly, it explains why my school horses can recognize a beginner about 100 feet away. Grandpa and Cash ended up being very good friends by the end of it all. Cash quite missed him after he passed away. I love watching them in the fields like this. Even when you've got 20 or 30 horses together, they never seem to run into each other. That's just Grandpa being goofy because he can. Wasn't he grand? See you next week.